We start recording because today we're going to start off by talking about war. Any questions or comments before we start, though, about anything I just mentioned about Yom HaShoah or Yom Ha'atzmaut? So today we definitely want to dedicate the class in honor of those who were murdered during the Shoah, those who became Jewish martyrs during that period of time between 1933 and 1945. And yeah, this has become to some extent even more important as we hear people talk about the Holocaust or reappropriate it in our own day. I think we have to be very careful when we any party or any person invokes Nazis to compare what's going on today or genocide. Those things are a serious issue for me, and I hope they're serious issues for other people because this is part of what we've been dealing with, especially over the last few years. We've seen it happen in very sad ways. So,
Hey, Rabbi,
yeah,
um, I'll be a bit generic with my discussion here, but I uh, I was I was communicating with someone that I trust yesterday, and he's not Jewish, and he's a very knowledgeable guy. And I don't know if anybody else on this call has encountered this stuff. I really don't know if you know, but he says it's a bit crazier than we may even anticipate out there with especially with the younger generation with regards to Jew hatred. I don't want to get too explicit, but there's some crazy stuff going around, and I mean, really crazy. And I mean, he's not kidding, right? I mean, he couldn't believe it, and it happened in a social setting, and it's happened in a work setting for him, and I'm just wondering if anybody else has run into this stuff because, I was a bit flabbergasted when I heard something about McDonald's. So has anybody heard anything about that? I mean, I'm not going to get explicit because it's just crazy. I could just say it's like almost related to Soylent Green, if you will. So is
in the sense that you feel like people aren't aware of how bad it is. You feel like
I I do. I
yeah,
do.
you feel like Charlton Heston at the end of the movie screaming, "This is what it is." Yeah, I think it's getting to feel like that. Again, the Jewish community is trying to figure out the organized Jewish community. I just got off a call yesterday with the UJA. We were talking about funding priorities. The Jewish community is not really sure what to do because there's a real question is there anything we can do to stop Jew hatred, right? Is there anything we can do financially or where we put our efforts into combating it? That's obviously what the ADL their mission is to do that. And there's other organizations now that are kind of shifting their priorities towards addressing anti-Semitism, but it's a question of like how to do it. And some people have argued. Again, we talked about the Brett Stevens presentation a couple of months ago. According to what he says, we can't fix it, but that doesn't mean we don't. It doesn't change our reality. But rather than spend money on trying to convince these people who hate us to love us, that we need to understand that they're going to, and then respond accordingly, but not to spend money and effort in trying to change their mind. But it's still something that I mean, you can't listen to this without realizing that we are in different ground. There's no question about it.
I brought up to him. Listen, guys, I'm not trying to hijack today's class, but it was a bit freaky actually to me, right?
Well, finish what you were going to say. You brought
I,
up him.
I brought it to him, well, because it was younger people, right? That was it was in a social situation, a camping situation. Like he went off to a campsite for the weekend, and some people joined him, and like, and I said, well, maybe it's Fuentes and you know, Carlson, Owens, Kelly. Maybe it's their ilk that's having some. He said, no, they don't have the reach you think they have the reach. He says this is he seems to think it's a bit more systemic. So has anyone on this call, your kids or as any or a friend, has anybody encountered anything like this? I mean, I'm not being specific. I get it. It's very. I don't. We're being recorded. I don't want to get too specific. I do it in private, but um,
You mean specific about McDonald's or specific about?
no, that's it's kind of weird. It's so off the wall, Gail, that it's not even worth. That's not worth. It's it's like a second blood libel type of thing, like somehow McDonald's is controlled by the Jews and feeding
Yeah,
humans through McDonald's. Have you heard that stuff? But the fact
no,
I
but
never even heard it. But the fact it's being, Judith, I get it. I understand, right? It's like, come on, that's bullshit, right? Don't even give them time. But it's that I mean, telling you, he said this is what's happening with the teens, the older teens, and the very young adults, and anyway, we can move on. I just want to say, it is out there because he caught me because we were always discussing this stuff,
well,
whatever it
Sarah
has.
does a group called "You Are Not Alone" up here, and there's a lot of incidences of anti-Semitism. I'm shocked at how much it against youth too. Just
So
hatred.
there
Yeah, and
there's a
among people that are very left wing. It's LGBTQ people, and that just think it's very cool to be anti-Jew, anti.
yeah. I'll tell you once again, we become the scapegoats. So
Yeah.
although I did hear something very fun, I get to say this, right? How many people? 8 billion people in the world, right, Rabbi? Something like that. And there's 16 million of us. It ain't us. That's all I gotta say. We ain't your problem.
A
So
couple of people, yes, have recently reposted
I
that
I thought
meme,
that
if
was
you will.
yeah,
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cute. Anyway, sorry about that.
So no, but we are talking about we're coming back to what we finished with last week, which was war, which was this war that Abraham, our ancestor, has with with as we pointed out, it's a war between the Canaanite kings, five of them, versus an Eastern alliance. Kings that I mentioned, ironically, were places where Abraham and his family actually started from, what we call Mesopotamia. These kings attack the land of Canaan because the Canaanite kings decide they don't want to pay tribute anymore, and they come and they attack. This is the attack route that the blue route is the route here on this side that they come down and then they go down here, they come down here, and then they return from this battle here near the Dead Sea, and they come back all the way up. It's when Avraham hears about it, he's been camping and literally camping, right? He's a nomad. He's in Hebron, south of Jerusalem, Salem or Jerusalem. He attacks or he chases after the Eastern kings as they return back to Mesopotamia, and he attacks them here in Dan, which is very far north. It's the far north reaches of in the Galilee of where the kingdom of Israel will eventually find itself. So it is in his territory, if you will, but it's the very far north reaches, and so he attacks them there. And this is Avraham's. That's where we left off. The battle of the five kings versus the four kings. It's called. Now, part of what we also read is that Lot was kidnapped. His nephew Lot is kidnapped and taken by those kings, and not the only person who's taken, but he's taken, and Avraham is drawn into this battle essentially to protect his nephew. So it's this line right here. that reminds us that Lot in the previous chapter, in chapter 13, had gone to live in that area. And it seems that he didn't just settle near the area, which is where we left off, but actually he goes into the city of Sodom. So when Abraham goes, this is where we left off. Uh, he attacked. He attacked them, and he came back. And it says here that this guy, I think this is kind of where we left off. We'll start off here with this very strange incident that happens when Avram comes back with his um with his stuff, because we did not talk, even if we read this part, we didn't jump into this.
Can you remind me how many people were part of Avram's group now?
Yeah,
Was it
so 300, it says 318, which is a
Okay.
very specific number. That's not like around 300, 318. So some people see it as kind of a mystical number that, maybe it represents certain things, but because it's such a weird number, it's such a specific number that people think that there must be some symbolic north thing here. So again, he goes again even to Chobah as they're coming back. And then it says this line right here in verse 18. So, Rosemary, would you like to start reading this part about King Melchizedek, this mysterious king? We're going to read a couple of verses of what happens here. So,
I I would like to dedicate my study to the
David,
memory of my husband David.
David,
So
yeah,
it is on the
thank you. Yeah,
17th, and
his
also to give thanks for the safe return of the astronauts who got the whole world to pray for the return of integrity.
yeah, it was a great moment. The Artemis return, and yes, we're definitely thinking about David this week. His yard site will be the Friday, right?
Yeah, 17th.
So, the I will tell you this, since you brought it up, Rosemary, and it is a wonderful thing to remind people, because when we see stuff in the space mission, to me, any type of space mission is a chance for us to be unified and to have a chance to I was going to show you that I actually was at Houston a few years ago. I was at the Johnson Space Center, and they were working on some of the Artemis stuff. And here, I'll just show you real quick. This was part of what we saw, but this isn't the actual. This wasn't part of the Artemis stuff that we saw, but it was amazing to see, and to know that part of that was going to be going, part of what we saw. I don't know if they let us actually take pictures in the Artemis hangar, but it was awesome to see that and to know. I mean, that was 4 years ago. Yeah, it was 4 years ago we were there, but it was so cool to know that part of what we were looking at was going to be helping people return back to the moon. So yeah, it's very cool. And I know your
It
husband David for
was
many years was an engineer, and was around people who were, doing this on a daily basis, doing this work as a daily basis. So
it was amazing to have three generations sitting on the couch and watching the splash down. And my granddaughter kept asking if we could pause it.
that's
And we're
that's a
like, no,
different
no, it's happening now.
that's a different generation. Can we watch this? Can we
I
time?
said, well, they showed mission control. I said, wow, there's a lot more women than there used to be. And Michael said, I don't remember what it used to be.
Yeah. Listen, it's really a shame. And I actually did a sermon about it years ago about space. It was my Star Trek sermon, but I said that, when we had space missions that brought the country together, it gave people a sense of common purpose, and it really transcends, even a country. It becomes a worldwide unifying factor to bring people together. And, if it had happened 20 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago, when we weren't kind of at war with Russia again, even some of this stuff, And you saw the picture actually I showed you was
Yeah,
one of the
excited.
Soyuz vehicles. I mean, people remember that the Apollo Soyuz missions were ways that helped us still believe that there could be common humanity even when the Soviet Union existed. So, yeah, it was a really cool thing, especially when we were taking up astronauts from other countries and yeah, it brought back a lot of memories. Also, unfortunately, brought back memory of Elon Ramon
Mm.
and so a couple people were asking me about that, and I have to say, I mean, considering that that was now, when you think about it 20 years ago, I really wish that we had done more missions. We had done something really uh, to do that. But yeah, thanks for reminding us about that, Rosemary. That is really a spiritual thing. But back to some spiritual stuff and some kind of crazy mystical stuff here in the Bible is the next three verses.
And King Melchizedek of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him, saying, Blessed be Avram of God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your foes into your hand. And Avram gave him a tenth of everything.
Yeah. Now, in a moment, we're going to see what happens with the king of Sodom. This is the king of Salem, which, I mean, I'm just going to show you the note right here. This is a translation of the words El Elyon. So here we have a very interesting um, allusion to, I would say here, like when we read about the Nephilim, we have a we have a reference here to something that we really don't understand. This is a form short form notation for stuff we don't understand, in the sense that we don't understand who this King Melchizedek is. Why does Avram give him a tithe? Why is he a priest of God? It seems like our God. Who is he? And um, why is he blessing Abraham in the name of El Elyon? What's going on here? He calls God by one of our names for God. Not he doesn't use the Yod Hey Vav Hey, but he says El Elyon. You hear it El Elyon. We say it in our prayers, like the Amidah. So we're not really sure who he is. We don't we haven't heard about him. We he's You've read the first 14 chapters of Genesis over the last few months. We've never heard about this guy. He hasn't appeared anywhere. Is God talking to other people like Avram and making covenants and agreements and prayers? Who is this guy? So 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 of course the rabbis don't like people popping out of nowhere who we don't have a backstory on, right? So he's got to be somebody. So the rabbis did a little quick math looking at how old people are, how old they could be. And guess who the rabbis, I'm not going to say the only midrash, but there is several midrashim. There's a whole strain of midrashim on who this guy is. Anyone want to guess who the rabbis think Melchizedek might be? He's very, very old.
Wasn't he like Enoch or somebody like that?
Not that old, but close. No, from after Noah, but
Mhm.
just after Noah,
Ah,
meaning they think he's Shem
ah,
because they did the math. And if you look at how long Shem lives, maybe Shem is still alive, and Shem is this guy who still knows who God is. Okay, that's one possibility, that it's Shem. That Shem is now called Melchizedek because the name Melchizedek means king of justice, right?
mhm.
Melech Tzedek.
How
Samuel Stolman, FaceTime video.
Wait. Yeah.
sorry, nothing.
So
Nothing.
if this is Shem, okay, uh, that could explain how he is doing what he's doing. How Avram recognizes him, how he recognizes Avram, why he's there. That's a possibility. But of course, doesn't really still answer the question. So what is he doing? Is it if there's people that are recognizing God, it, maybe you could make the argument: is Melchizedek have a following? He's a king. Um, what's going on here? Now, the fact that it's in Salem, right, which becomes Jerusalem, that's Jerusalem, means that there's a holy thing going on in Jerusalem even before Avram. Okay, so that makes Jerusalem, of course, the holy city, really the holy city, because it's been a holy city since Shem got off the boat. He's been running holiness there. Okay, so that's good because it's association with Jerusalem. But who is this guy? So so we get also a midrashic understanding way early, right? Maybe even to the beginning. Because again, it seems as though the Torah is not telling us the whole story. Like there is a story there that they're not telling us. That's why I say it's like the short form, like it's the notes. But if there's part of the world who already knows what God is, that means there's maybe this kind of universal religion. There's this universal understanding of God that's not particular to Judaism. So there are people out there who know God, but they don't have a peoplehood, they don't have an ethnicity, they don't have a family to put it into practice. But that there are always people who have this this kind of um, this understanding, and Judaism is just the family of the people who do that. But there is actually a universal message here. So of course, guess what? Who else do you think has a little something to say about who Melchizedek is? Anybody want to guess?
The Mormons?
Oh, they will. I'll get there,
The
please.
Christians?
Yeah, let's first
He's-
let's first
he's
look at the
Christ?
let's first look at the Christian Bible. Because
Yeah.
in Paul's epistles to the letters, his letters to the Hebrews, which by the way, we talked about on Wednesday night a few weeks ago, we talked about Paul's letters, and we talked about who Paul was. Paul, in his letters to Jews, right? Because the letters to the Hebrews are his letters to Jews. He reminds the Jews that God had always had a connection with the Gentiles. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And by the way, that order of Melchizedek is what the Mormons are going to drive. They're going to take that. So this isn't the end though. This is chapter 5, but it continues. Um, Look at this. What's if God was speaking to Melchizedek during the time of Abraham, when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself, saying, "I will surely bless you and give you many descendants." Right, and so after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. Now, what they just said is that Melchizedek, Melchizedek. Well, I'll show you one more section. Melchizedek was king of Salem, the priest of God Most High. He met Avram. It's right there, right? It's right there. Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. By the way, obviously, this line right here is the commentator trying to tell you this. Do you understand? This is the actual text. To some extent, again, what the epistle to Hebrews is going to say is that Jesus is the embodiment of Melchizedek. So, if you will, just bear with me when I say this. What epistles is doing is creating a midrash around Melchizedek, saying that essentially what's happening now is what was kind of what we see here in Genesis. And what, of course, is the final point that the Christians should take away? That there are no more sacrifices anymore. And remember, this is written at a time when there still was a temple. Paul lives and preaches while the temple is still standing, just before it's destroyed, but it's still standing. And what, of course, he says is that there now no longer is a need for, right? Unlike it, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day for his own sins and then for the sins of his people. He sacrificed for their sins once and for all when he offered himself. So what does the Midrash really take away? Jesus is the next version of Melchizedek, but because there is no more sacrifices because he was sacrificed. So understand that the Christian midrash on this exists because there was a lot of other midrash about who Melchizedek was, and they did what the rabbis were doing too, which was giving a midrashic understanding of what do we take away from this? What's our learning from this? This very bizarre scene that we don't really know what's happening. There must be something here. So, who said Mormonism, by the way? Who said Latter-day Saints?
I did.
So, what do you know about this?
That they, I know there's some that somehow they trace their religious authority to Melchizedek.
Excellent. I would make, and I want you to understand what the Mormons believe. The Church of Latter-day Saints believes that there was an Aaronic priesthood. They read the Bible. They know what's in the book of Leviticus. They know what's there. But the Aaronic priesthood, the priesthood that traces itself back through Moses' brother Aaron, is a lesser form of a priesthood, which is the Melchizedek priesthood, which the Mormons are now the bearers of. So they didn't need to go far for that. They went to the Christian Bible, they went to the Epistle of Hebrews and built on that. They built on what Jesus says, and now they say that they're the inheritors of that priesthood. And so when Mormons talk about a priesthood, right, they are part of the Melchizedek priesthood. Interesting, right? It's a very important idea in the Church of Latter-day Saints. And all of you that are getting caught up in Secret Lives of Mormon Wives and all that other stuff, which my kids, by the way, are somehow got into. I don't understand how. But everybody who is watching all the Mormon influencers are missing the other part of this, which is they have a theology that is based on the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, but also says other stuff in it which is not in the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. And again, one of it is that there are priests in the Mormon faith, and they are part of this order.
I thought they thought they were one of the lost tribe. They were the lost tribe.
Well, they believe that the Native Americans were part of the lost tribes. That's part of their belief, and that Jesus preached to those lost tribes, that Jesus came to the New World. But what allows them as interestingly, they call us Gentiles. They call everyone who's not Mormon Gentile, but allows that is this order of Melchizedek. What allows this idea is that Jesus was preaching to other communities outside of the Jewish community. So that is what allows them to, the focus isn't so much on the fact that the Native Americans, some of the Native Americans can trace their ancestry back to Hebrews who fled the first temple destruction, right? These are Jews that were living here so that when Jesus would have come here, they were already here for several hundred years. That's part of their theology. But by the way, they didn't necessarily even invent that. There were already people who were talking about this idea that, the lost tribes might have made their way even to the New World, that there's theories that, the Japanese are descendant of the tribes, that the Saxons are. I have a whole library of books of 12 tribes, the not 12 tribes, the lost tribes speculation. And there are a lot of groups that said, would say that these people are descendants of the lost tribes. But yeah, they base that on other types of teachings. And I will say this too. Again, it's not my area of expertise, and it's not an area that I really want to dive that into. But the LDS Church borrowed a lot of their stuff too from the Freemasons. People have written about it. There's studies about it. It's not I don't know that much about Masonic lore, and I don't know that, and I don't know enough about LDS lore. But I will tell you that there are some similarities. And the Masons also talked about Melchizedek. They also talked about a universal priesthood. And look, at the end of the day, when the Bible provides these opportunities for people to start thinking, start riffing on things, they do it. And so these three lines, I mean, you think like people read these three lines and they like, what does this mean? Like, I don't they just read, they gloss over it. But my point is, there are theological constructs based on these three lines that are vital to the LDS Church, that you could make the argument like in all of Genesis, there's really not many more lines that are more important for things that are uniquely LDS than these three lines. So again, we don't know. It allows for midrashic speculation, and in some cases, it'll lead to some very interesting discussions. And by the way, I mean, folks, I just showed you the epistles of the Hebrews. It's 3 chapters of the Christian Bible that are a riff on these 3 lines. That's you saw it. I'm not making that up. That's 3 lines of Torah that, again, we don't even know, like, there's midrash on it. I'm not saying we don't have stuff on it, but it's not like nobody would say this is the most important part of Genesis, or maybe even of this chapter. But for some people, it's really, really important. So I just want to point that out. I think it's fascinating. I mean, I think if you want to imagine what this meeting looked like, right, where Avram has a blessing from this Melchizedek. Yeah, you'll see paintings of this in Mormon church and Mormon temples, and you'll see um, yeah, you'll see some interesting stuff. Of course, that picture just made me think about the Trump picture yesterday too. So, but you'll see those are very similar to some of the Mormon art that you'll see in LDS churches. I don't know if anyone's ever been in them before, but there's some. You walk past a picture of Jesus, you'll be like, "Whoa, I never saw a picture of that before," and some of it's based on text from the Mormon scriptures, but some of it is just stuff that, um, yeah. Anyways, so any questions, any comments about Melchizedek? If you do, I don't have any others because I just told you everything I know about it, and I don't know that much. But I know what I know. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, it's not really there. You gotta you got 3 lines mystery. All right. Now,
You know, Rabbi,
yeah,
I'm just wondering if during church services and stuff, these things are part of sermons.
I don't know. I don't know. I asked Shaver if he ever talked about Melchizedek, and I don't think I think he said if he has, it hasn't been very often, and it hasn't been for a long time. So he didn't remember anything that he had said about it. I yeah, I don't know. I don't know how people would preach on the Hebrews, on the epistle to the Hebrews. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a major, if you really go down that, because to some extent, if you think about it, that is really a text which kind of opens up more questions about why are you even talking about this? And the reason that Paul is talking about it is because he's trying to tell early Jews and early Christians, you don't need to worry about sacrificing anymore. Like Melchizedek, this kind of stuff is like it all opened it up, and it's kind of answered by Jesus. So I think that like if you think about it, that's kind of why it wouldn't even necessarily be of an issue. It'd only be an issue really for people who have to worry about sacrifices. But yeah. Now we're going to contradict what's interesting, or contrast the what happens here with the king of Sodom. So you saw what happens with the king of Salem. Now this is the king of Sodom. This is where obviously where Lot was living. So let's read this little text.
Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the persons and take the possessions for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I swear to the eternal, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, I will not take so much as a thread or a sandal strap of what is yours. You shall not say, 'It is I who made Abram rich.' For me, nothing but what my servants have used up. As for the share of those who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their share."
So this is an interesting scene. And again, another few lines. Uh, what goes on here with the king? And again, this this is an interesting scene. This guy, we know his name is King Bera of Sodom. He's the king. Avram says, "I don't want anything. I don't want to. I don't want anything. I don't want to. I don't want a shoelace," is what he's saying. Right? I'm not taking anything. Let the guys who went with me, who, by the way, those other guys he just mentioned, they're all Canaanite. They're Canaanite. These guys on Eresh Kol Mamre, they're not Israelite. They're not his people. They're not Israelite. They're not Hebrew. There's no Israel yet. But they're not him. They're not his people. They're his friends. They're his colleagues, or the other people we read about that are living in Hebron. These are Canaanites. So he says, let them take stuff. I'm not taking from you guys. I am not taking from the Canaanites. You can see he's pretty adamant about it. Now, this is the only time that Avram really, goes into battle. I mean, we don't read about Avram going into battle. This is not his thing. He's not known as a warrior. He's not known as a fighter. So he did risk his life for his nephew. And by the way, again, at this point, his closest thing to an heir, right? We said that he doesn't have an heir. And I say that because that's going to be a real big part of the story for the next 5 chapters. Who's Avram's heir? So at this point, Lot is his heir. But we see him here as a warrior. We see him here as a fighter, risking everything for uh, his adopted son, his heir. But he wants nothing in return. Again, it's as if he's saying, I did not do it for you. I want to make it really clear. I didn't do it for any kind of economic expectation. I did it. I did it for my nephew. And if you guys want to divide it up amongst yourselves, Canaanites. I'm not part of this. And he says, I don't want you to one day say that I got rich from this. So it's very interesting how he has done this. And some of us might have found ourselves in situations where um where we can benefit financially from something and we don't, and we choose not to. We choose to say, "Hey, I don't want any piece of that. I don't want any I don't want I don't want any part of that." It takes moral courage to do that, right? It takes integrity to do that. It's hard when you have power not to take advantage of it financially, but he doesn't. And again, like what it seems to be the issue is not that he deserves it, like because he risked his life. And by the way, you notice how the king of Sodom is negotiating with him right away. Avram doesn't say, "Hey, how are we splitting this up?" He comes at him like, "Here, give me back the people, but you can keep everything. You can keep everything that you took." Which, by the way, also underlies this kind of understanding that Avram is the one in charge right now. Avram's the one who got all this stuff, and technically speaking, technically speaking, could either charge to bring the captives back or keep them as his own captive. The people were taken hostage into slavery, assumedly, and he took them. Technically speaking, he could keep them. I mean, I'm saying he should. I'm saying that would make it right, but he could. So all of that is at play here. And I would say, okay, there's some takeaways here. Avram is a man of integrity. Avram doesn't believe that he one of the concerns, of course, he has is he doesn't want to be accused of getting rich off of them, right? But it also contrasts with the quick scene that we just read about with the king of Salem, which is a totally different scene, the different king, where that's a holy scene. That's a respectful and spiritual scene. Whereas this is a negotiation, and there's an underlying lack of trust, obviously, that Avram has with these people. And to some extent, there's also this implied, and look at my, loser nephew who's living amongst you. And he just saved him. And of course, we know he's going to save him again. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So think about that. It's also the juxtaposition of that story with what happens with the king of Salem. So it's an interesting issue, and it's one that I think, again, this is the end of the chapter. The next chapter is a different unit. But this little story here, chapter 14, which a lot of people just kind of skip over, it's part of Lech Lecha. It's part of the chapters that starts chapter 12 with this beautiful blessing over Avram. It's the first time we meet Avram. It's got the story of Avram and Sarah going to Egypt. This is a scene that's not usually talked about, but it's a really interesting scene, and it's one that we got to look at a little bit more in depth. And I think one of the things we learn about our ancestor is that he has a great deal of integrity, shows that he has integrity, and doesn't want to get rich off of people, especially he doesn't want to be even connected to people who have bad moral fiber, right? It also teaches us a really interesting lesson too, which is that not all victories are monetized. Sometimes when we win, we're not getting paid at the end of it, and we shouldn't expect to get paid. We win, we know we did the right thing, and we're not getting paid. So Avram also models for us a way of winning where there isn't, there aren't, to the victor do not necessarily go the spoils. He won, and he has complete power in that moment, and he doesn't get wrapped up into it. Oh, but again, part of the implications, I don't want to have anything to do with these people of Sodom. I don't want to be bound to them. I don't want them to say, to be able to, for them to sit back in their town and go, hey, look, Avram got rich off of us. No, doesn't want it. So this is a historic event. This is assumedly was part of the history of the ancient Near East, the four kings versus five kings. People knew it. In itself is a shorthand for this battle that people knew about. Avraham, as I mentioned, is kind of like Forrest Gump here, in that he makes it he makes an entry into this battle, and he's successful in the battle. But again, as much as Avraham enters history, he doesn't let the history define him. He is beyond getting sucked into the politics and to the economics of this, which, by the way, is an interesting issue as we think about it today. As we think about the backdrop of a war and intermediate ceasefire that we're in right now. United States, lots of the world is definitely focused on economics, right? What's the economic costs of this battle if it goes on, if what had already happened, this. Do you know where they're not asking that question, folks? Do you know where they're not talking about the price of gas, and where they're not talking about how much the stock markets are fluctuating?
Iran.
Well, yeah. Well, Iran, they
Israel.
are actually. Iran, they are, because their prices have gone up 40% since the war started. So they are talking about it. And actually, some people are hoping that this is what's actually going to cause the regime changes, that people are going to go back after they feel safe to go outside, that they're going to take to the streets again. Because that's what happened in January. The protest actually started because of the economy, because of the collapse of the real.
But the government doesn't care how many
Well,
people die or how many.
fine, but that's what the hope is. So the economy is an issue in Iran. Somebody else said it though. Who doesn't care about the economic cost of what's going on right now? Israel.
Israel.
Israel. Yeah, Judah said it. Israel, they are not talking about the price of gas right now. They're not talking about the economic costs of war right now. People in Israel do not want a ceasefire for the most part. They don't want a ceasefire along the lines of what is being discussed right now. That's for sure. Yeah, they don't care. There's no discussion about the economic costs. There's no discussion about it at all. I mean, it's just not on there. You read the Jerusalem Post, read the Haaretz and translate. They're not talking about it. There's no articles about it. Now, again, this is an existential threat to Israel that they want an end to it. They want an end to the rockets coming over from Lebanon, and they want an end to the existential threat of Iran. Because when Iran attacked it last June, Israel, for the most part, again, knew that there would be a response after after living under the shadow of Iranian attacks. But as Israel is as far as Israel is concerned, as long as Iran can still launch missiles, which they still obviously can, the war's not over. So this is a little bit this is a little bit the way Israel feels today, which is like Avram. It's like when you took my nephew, I was getting involved. That's when I got involved. I don't want your money. I don't care about control of the Straits of Hormuz. I don't want to hear about. First of all, Israel is never obviously that was never an issue for Israel, was that they were going to somehow control the shipping lanes. Israel wasn't doing that, so this was never about that. And so it's a little interesting kind of issue here, which is, yeah, I'm getting involved because you took my family. So I think that that is a difference. And there's always going to be this question when when the United States gets involved in a war in the Middle East, are they doing it for the oil? Right? I mean, did we attack Iraq for the oil? Is this to some extent to guarantee that Iranian oil will eventually flow through the West? I mean, did we attack Venezuela so we could control one of the largest reserves? so that's always going to be an issue for people when we talk about the United States being involved in conflicts. Not Israel. I'm be saying Israel is trying to control the economics of the Middle East. So weird, a weird similarity. I'm not saying that we're not living in the time of Avram, but we are motivated less by the economics of it. And nobody is saying at the end of the day that Israel is going to walk away economically uh, better by this war, right? I just want to put that out there. Um, anyways, interesting to say the least. There's some interesting continuity. I hope we can keep our integrity like our ancestor Avram. So, any questions or comments? We're going to move into chapter 15 in a second. So we're about to we're about to change lanes, kind of go into um, a new a new part of the tale. And I'm laughing only because whenever we have these words in the Bible, uh, I think this is actually the first time we've had these words in the Bible, but yeah, I think they are. We're never sure how much time passes. Um, so it's difficult to know. It's difficult to know what the what the time what the when you watch an episode of something or a new season of something, right? How much time passed since the last, like, yeah, we have to establish in our heads as viewers how much time has passed since the last episode, right? Especially with new seasons, but sometimes even with episodes, right, of a show, we're like, did it happen? I know not on the pit, everyone. I don't watch the pit, but I know everyone. It's one day. But the time shift between stories is oftentimes an issue. And but we're set up for a linear story. Here we have this line. John, do you want to read today?
Hallelujah. It's not just naming conventions that are
There's
going
no
to.
there's no names. Well, there are. It's very simple.
I was
Very
just going to
simple.
say, I'm going to defer to Rosemary. She can take over that part. She seems to
No,
do a much better job. Sometime later, the word of God came to Avram in a vision. Fear not, Avram. I shield to you. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. But Avram said, hold on, I got to move your picture, Rabbi. Hold on. But Avram said, O my sovereign God, what can you give me, seeing that I shall die childless, and the one in charge of my household is Damzik Elazar?
yeah. So and I'll just show you the note here. Um, it's basically telling us again, we're not exactly sure what Damesek Eliezer is. And I will, well, let's first read it before we explain it. So the first part is sometime later, and literally in Hebrew, achar hadavarim haele, after this, sometime after these events, after these things, but we don't know. Is it a year? Is it 10 years? Is it 3 months? We don't know. We don't know. Um, but it is a good editorial comment that some time elapsed. Now, could be 20 years, honestly. Um, but enough time has elapsed that Avram seems to have moved on from Lot. And by the way, Lot is still coming. Story of Sodom and Gomorrah is still coming. That enough time has passed that Lot has moved out of Avram's mind as his heir, but that instead it's this guy Eliezer. And who the heck is Eliezer?
Well, first question is, how do you know it's a guy? I had to do AI to figure out it was a guy. To me, it looks, I don't know if it's a,
How do we know it's a guy? Well, it's a guy's name. Eliezer is a dude's name, just so you know, right? It means God is my help. God is my Eli as Ezer means help. So we know this guy is we know he's a guy. Is
Rabbi, is Eliezer his surname?
Yeah, no, it's his
And
first name. It's his first name. They don't have surnames. It's Eliezer ben whoever his father was. Okay, the problem
oh,
is we don't know.
oh,
We don't know. We don't know that. We don't know where he came from, other than he's called Damasek. Now, there's, I guess the standard reading of this is that he's from Damascus. He's from the city of Damascus, the Damascene. By the way, we use the word Damascene steel because they had really good steel in Damascus, Syria, right? The capital. I mean, it's a very ancient city, Damascus. So there is this understanding that uh, Avram purchased him as a slave, or somehow he came part of Avram's retinue, but he's originally from Damascus. But we really don't know who he is. So there's a midrash that he's actually the son of Nimrod, that king that we read about in the time of the Tower of Babel, the king that had this rivalry with Avram, that somehow this guy becomes part of Avram's retinue as kind of like compensation. Um, but we don't really know. I mean, that's because we don't know who he is. We don't know where he came from. And so there's a lot of midrash about who he was. You might have seen, by the way, too, when you looked him up, John, and I mentioned this last week, that 318 weird number, that's actually the gematria. That's the numerical equivalent of the name Eliezer. If you add up Eliezer, it comes out to 318 if you add up the numbers. Well, if that's the case, then Avram didn't take anyone other than Eliezer with him. When it says he took 318, it means he just took Eliezer. So Avram is so, bad. He's Rambo, right? He's so tough that he only needed Eliezer to go after the king's. Look, we don't know who he is. And we do read about him later on because he's involved in going to get Rebecca as a wife for Isaac. He's put in charge of that mission. So we will come back to him, but we don't know anything about him really at this point. This is the first time he's been mentioned, unless he's the 318. This is the first time he's mentioned, and he's so important that Avram thinks that he's the one who's going to inherit everything because he doesn't have kids. And the way Avram says it is, God, I mean, look at the language. Ma titenli. What are you giving me, God? And that's what he says. That's the translation. Here it says, what can you give me? But it could also be, what have you given me? What are you giving me? I mean, that's kind of the way we'd say it today. God, what are you giving me? I don't have a kid. Here you are, God. You promised me maybe now decades ago that I'm going to have kids, and I don't have any kids. So I'm going to make my steward. And the Hebrew word for steward, as everyone sees, is, what does this say? Does everyone see this?
my heir.
Ben Beiti, the son of my house. Now, steward is a nice translation for that, but what does it sound like?
It's like he's an illegitimate kid, or it's his kid.
Or
His heir.
his
Heir.
son of his house.
Son of his house. Yeah.
It's a slave. It's a child born
Oh,
into his house.
okay,
Ben
illegitimate kid.
literally means the son of my house, right? The son of my house. Now, maybe again, it had this understanding that this was some other kind of role, but my friends, I mean, it's very possible that he sees this slave boy as the closest thing to an heir he has. Pretty wild. It's pretty wild. And it
Well,
seems, and again, we know that he's important later on in the story that Avram definitely trusts him. He trusts him with his very important mission. But however this has happened, by this point, Avraham sees this as his heir. And that's what he says. My Yoresh, my inheritance will be going to him. It's his. My inheritance is his.
it's interesting that you bring that up, regarding the Hebrew translation, because it is so much different than steward, right? That is a discussion in itself. Is why was it translated to steward?
Mary, what does the King James say for it?
It says steward.
Okay, that's where it came from, John.
Hey, Glory, what does it say in yours?
It's not going to say steward.
Hang on. Hang on.
That's right. Stay focused.
Servant.
Yeah.
But I have a footnote, and it does say it's his servant. It says, let's see. Hold on, sorry. Okay, it demonstrates that a childless man could adopt one of his own male servants to be heir and guardian of his estate.
Yeah. So steward seems to imply the trust that he has, but it seems like he's a servant, which is another way of saying he's a slave. Now, again, it goes against our idea of what a slave would be, because the idea that a slave could inherit his master's stuff is, you know,
Well, that's the conflict, right? That's the conflict in religion. That if a slave son can inherit everything, then the lineage stops, right?
well, yeah, but even more so in Judaism, in Jewish tradition, a slave might not, at least the way we have to take care of slaves, it might not be the way that you think a slave, what your vision of what slavery was. And again, it also could be because there were different versions of slavery. It didn't mean one thing. Um, and again, I want to point out the problem is it doesn't use the word eved here. I don't think it ever actually uses the word eved or servant or slave for him, which leads some people to say, and you'll see in some translations or commentary, that Damesek is actually not from Damascus, but is somehow a word meaning my steward. Like a Mesek, Damesek is a servant. It's a title. It means a steward. So that's why I didn't translate it. That's why the note here is it's uncertain. Here they didn't translate it. They didn't even bother translating it because they didn't want to either go with it means butler or steward or that he's from Damascus. So there's different understandings of it from 2000 years ago. So I'm only going to tell you we've not been sure of this for a very, very long time, but he is going to make another appearance. At this point, Avraham says, this is the closest thing to a son I have, which also indicates that whatever happened to Lot, however that relationship has changed over time, we just saw that he was willing to risk his life to rescue him in the previous story, and we have no mention of an Eliezer. Now has enough time elapsed that this young guy who maybe was a baby when he became part of Abraham's household is now grown up to be old enough to be seen as an heir for him. But no matter what, Avram seems to not be happy with this. I mean, he challenges God and says, God, you promised me an heir. You promised me I'm going to have more children than I can count, that everyone's going to bless themselves through me with a family that's going to be a nation. Where is this nation? Where is this? Where? Because all I have right now is the household steward or servant who's going to inherit everything. That's a far cry from what you promised me. And he challenges God here. He really does. He challenges, this is a challenge to God. Now,
It's a big crossroads, huh?
yeah,
In theology.
yeah, and I think that enough time has elapsed. I think that enough time has elapsed, and you'll see maybe how much time has elapsed. I don't know for sure, but we're going to read about Lot having a family by the time we get to chapter 19.
Hey, Mark,
Daughters. Yeah.
is there any kind of midrash about Eliezer being a love child between Abraham and a servant woman?
Interestingly, new. Not that I know. Not that I. So there could be something modern, maybe a modern version of that. Could be. I don't know of any ancient versions of that. It's almost as if, uh, well, you're jumping ahead, right? You're going a chapter ahead. We'll get to it next week. The story of Ishmael, right? So because we have an Ishmael story coming, like the idea of Abraham having a baby with somebody else is a possibility. The difference is that, remember, that was Sarah telling him to do it. Nobody's told him to do that yet. And it doesn't seem like,
Do men ever really need to be told?
oh, okay, fine. But there's nothing here, Judith, that seems to imply that this dude has anybody walking around with his DNA in it. Because when he says, you've given me no offspring, lo natata zara, zara means seed, right? I haven't placed my seed anywhere. So it doesn't seem like, look, a modern midrash that he already did this would be an interesting one. I don't know I don't know that it's supported by the text as much as some midrash, though midrash doesn't need a lot, but it doesn't. I mean, the one thing that you could say is he's the son of my household, which could be. But again, I think that you have not given me any zara. I think indicates he's not his from his loins, if you will.
I'll accept it.
But and look at the next line. We didn't read the next line. I think the next line also kind of conveys that. But I like the possibility because maybe Avram did try surreptitiously to try to make this happen, but you could definitely there's stranger midrash that exists. So look at the next line.
Avram said
Oh wait,
further.
I think I skipped.
No.
No, we read that. Yeah.
3. We're on 3.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Avram said further, since you have granted me no offspring, my steward will be my heir. The word, it's almost like he's telling him. He's
Yeah.
telling him. Like,
You left me no choice.
yeah. The word of God came to him in reply. That's very generic. That one shall not be your heir. None but your own issue shall be your heir.
So that's why I would say, Judith, that is not his issue. He's not his issue.
That's fair.
That's a
fairly good. That's a fairly good indicator.
he's not from your loins. He will not be your heir. So
I'm more interested in how the word got to him.
what? Oh, so
Burning bush, smoking
okay,
cloud.
wait. So at the beginning it says it came to Avram in a vision, right? So it does say that this is a vision. Jose, this is a vision. So this is something he sees, right? This isn't just words. This is something that he sees. He's seeing God. And here it says God is God replies to him, which also implies that this is not just a vision of that God plants a dream in your head. This is a conversation. So this is something pretty deep. This is a conversation, right? And uh, God is um, I'm going to um, I'm going to just do something really quick, my friends, because you just raised a very interesting point, John. I am pretty sure we're going to go back to the beginning.
I like this way of Torah study because we passed over who are this.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
like getting into the weeds here.
yeah. Of course, it's the way it's meant to be done. It's the way we're supposed to be doing. You know what I'm going to tell you right now, folks? Uh, yeah, 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 yeah. Uh, this line right here, folks. You know what I'm going to say, right? I never realized this before. I promise you, I never realized this before. And all the times I've read this chapter, I've never realized this before. Anybody?
Which line? 3, 2?
The one that we just said,
Oh, 3.
line 3.
Hold on.
Does anybody want to recognize what the significance of this is? What I just discovered?
Since you have granted me no offspring, steward.
Or actually, it's line 2 and 3. It's not just 3. It's 2 and 3.
Well, give me a second here.
It's chapter 14 of Genesis.
The only one in charge of my household. I mean,
No. Somebody's going to say it.
It's a little nudgy.
It's not just nudgy, Judith. It is nudgy. It's 100%.
I mean, it's seriously like,
Okay, but I'm going to tell you. I'm
failed
going to
me.
tell you something that no one. I don't think anyone's ever told me this before, and I don't know that. Maybe I'm going to go look it up. I'm going to look it. I promise you, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to see if anyone's ever written about this. Anything? The significance of this? I bet you I could ask. I bet you I could ask 50 rabbis this question, and none of them will know the answer to this. What are the first words that Abraham ever said to God?
oh,
How
what's
about
up?
that? How about that? How about that?
Huh?
How about that? I just went to chapter 12. I did it real quick. If you were watching. Here's Avram's called by God. This is the first words that God says to Avram, Lech Lecha, right?
Mhm.
Avram says, I'm going to assign this to you and your offspring, right? Avram goes to Egypt. Avram separates from Lot. Avram goes and rescues his nephew from the kings. And here we are at the beginning of chapter 15. And this is the first thing that God said back to him in verse 2. God, Adonai,
Ah.
Ma titenli. The first words that God says, that Avram says to God, are God, what have you given me? Do you understand? Yeah, Judith, it's nudgy. But the very first words, I got to see if anyone's ever written about this.
That's it.
Anyone's
What have
ever
you, it's
pointed
kind
this
of, what
out.
have you done for me
What have
lately?
you done? Exactly. God, what have you done for me lately? The very first words of the very first Jew, the very first conversation that a Jew has with God. Conversation. Because God's been doing the speaking up until now, and Avram's followed the rules for the most part. Maybe he didn't. Wasn't supposed to go to Egypt. He doesn't. God doesn't say go get your nephew Lot. By the way, but for the most part, God, has been directing Avram. Go here, go there, do this, do that. And Avram's first words back to God are, "What have you done for me?" Wow. That is mind blowing.
An argumentative tone.
I don't know that and that somebody hasn't written this. Maybe someone's written a beautiful drosh on this, but that is mind blowing to me. To me, my mind was just blown, and I did not know when I woke up this morning that my mind would be blown by the fact that the very first words that a human being of the Jewish faith says to God, right? The very first words that any human says is as Adam saying to God, uh, when God says, Ayecha, where were you? He says, I was hiding from you. That was the first as a human being saying, I can't, I'm not, I don't know what to say, God. I'm naked.
Rabbi, I have a comment.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks, and it's the character, the values of Abraham, who we know has pimped out his wife some time ago. And I was thinking about that, and then thinking the chapter right before we get to this, you said, well, we're off on another track, we're doing something different. But I do see a connection between what we just are reading now and the deal that he turns down with the king of Sodom, who says, "I'm not going to take any money from this. I'm going to be I'm going to have integrity." Well, so we can see that there's this struggle of good and evil going on in Abraham, and here again, he has this issue where he's looking for compensation. He just turned it down, but now he's looking for compensation. In this case, the payment that he's looking for is somewhat greater than what the king of Sodom was going to offer him. He wants the the bigger payout, the generations that follow him. So he is looking for compensation. He is looking for payback. It's just he can turn down the king of Sodom, and now he's looking for the bigger payload. And again, I think
No, but wait, Floyd. But first of all, the first point is that you made almost again. You want to go over, but again, the idea that Avraham, and again, I'm talking about his integrity. Yeah, the same guy who pimps out his wife to get money doesn't want to take money from the king of Sodom. So it's interesting that that is the same guy because that is an important juxtaposition that we did not put out there because that's literally chapter 12 is the story of Avram and Sarai in Egypt. Yes, your point that now again this is the same guy. This guy who goes back and forth between showing tremendous integrity and at some points going yeah because he didn't leave the money back when he left Egypt. He took the stuff. He didn't say he left Egypt and said, "Hey, Pharaoh, keep your money. I just didn't want to. I didn't want you to kill me. That's why I said it." He never says that. So yeah, it's an interesting point that Avram it goes back and forth between parts that we would say, yeah, this guy is very has a lot of integrity, and in other parts you're going, that's insane. But again, for our ancestors who are looking at it as, he cannot be compromised. The Egyptian saga is somewhat whitewashed by the fact that he was genuinely fearful for his life. But the fact that he doesn't give it back when he leaves, it's always kind of stayed with me a little icky. Unless you justify it by saying that the Egyptians are, because they would have killed him, deserve to pay a penalty for that. But look, I mean, the whole thing is difficult. It's difficult to see. But yeah, so what do you take away from the fact that Avram is asking for the big compensation? What do you?
well, the fact is that your mind is blown, and I understand from your point of view that's the first words he says. But I'm certainly not shocked that he says, "What can you give me?" Because that's been part of his this thread that's going on, that we're looking at a flawed man. Um, and that seems to be another thread in the Bible that, like when we talked about, I'm jumping way ahead, but with Moses, that he had this affliction, and and isn't that the truth about Noah too? He's not the guy that we would have chosen for this heroic
Yeah.
task. So here we've got this. What can you give me? Yeah, he's saying, look, I've done all this stuff. Where's my payday?
Yeah.
You know what? I
And
look,
by the way, like when you're I don't know how old we are when we're kids if we're raised with some type of faith or some type of religious background. At what age do we essentially I'm only I'm only I'm only saying this because as I said, I now have to find out if anyone else has ever written about this.
Rabbi,
But no, I just let me finish. I was going to say at what age do we when we think about there being a God, or if there's a God, that we say, well, what's God given me? Like, isn't that really at some point really the first time that our theology meets the rubber meets the road in our theology, which is, okay, so what do I get out of this, God? Like, I believe in you, I follow your teachings, I do what you tell me. Where's my payback? Where's my money? Where's my reward? Where's my what do I get out of this? Where's my blessing?
I don't know if it's a reward. I believe this is the first evidence of an oral contract, and he's holding God responsible for breach of contract. He's holding him accountable. You promised me this. I did this. All right. Okay. That's the contract. You're breaching.
Yeah. Well, we will read next week the covenant of the pieces, which is we're right up. We're not going to get into it right now, though we could be. But I will say that.
Well, because the next line,
Okay, so let's read the
the
next line.
next line is God
So
being
so so,
is
so let's
trying to
let's read
fulfill his
let's
portion.
let's read the next few lines. You're right. Let's not leave that as a cliffhanger. Come on.
The word of God came to him in a reply. Wait, is that where we're at?
Yeah,
Oh, no,
then
no,
in the vision.
no,
Uh,
no, the next
yeah,
one. Then
yeah.
in the vision, God took him outside. So, right? So he complained that he was breaching, right? So then
Yeah.
God took him outside and said, look toward the heaven and
Well,
count the
by the way, that's in parentheses, right? Because we assume he's still having a vision. This is a little difficult. There is a difference of opinion in tradition whether the next scene that we're about to see, when is it a vision and when is it like happening in real time, not in his head. Okay.
What are the words in Hebrew, the first few words?
It says he went outside.
Uh, he went outside.
Yeah, vayotse oto hahutza, he took him outside. But again, it could be in the vision. It could be, you know, Avram sees us outside. But let's read it.
Okay. Then in a vision, God took him outside and said, look toward heaven and count the stars. If you're able to count them, continuing, so shall your offspring be. And he put his trust in God, who reckoned it to his merit.
Okay. Keep going.
Then God said to him, I am God who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to assign this land to you as a possession.
Okay, so stop right there. Now I don't know how to stop because
Now
now
we keep going.
now now we get into we'll read a little bit more because can't stop in the middle of what God's telling them, but it seems as though this next scene is more than just a vision. But here's what happens.
And he said, O my sovereign God, how shall I know that I am to possess it? Came the reply, Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old she-goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young bird. He brought all 3 of these and cut them in two, placing each half opposite the other, but he did not cut up the bird.
Yeah, and assuming the bird is the two birds, right? The three animals that were big enough to cut in half, he cuts. The cow, the goat, and the ram. The turtle dove and the bird, the two little ones, he doesn't cut them in two. Probably because again they're too small. Not that you can't cut a bird in two, but it's not it's not worth doing. Too small. Uh so these other ones he cuts up. This is an important scene because it's very bizarre. It's very specific, and he cuts them and he places them opposite each other.
It is very.
Yeah, there's something going on here, right?
Birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Avram drove them away. As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell upon Avram, and a great dark dread descended upon him. And God said to Avram, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. As for you, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried, you shall be buried at a ripe old age. And they shall return here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the
Okay.
sun,
Yeah, just finish it. Yeah.
you want to? Okay.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
the sun set, it was dark. It was very dark. There appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch that passed between those pieces.
As I said, I mean, you really can't, you really can't end it. But we're just going to finish with the last verses of this covenant. Here it goes. This is not names, but they're the peoples, right? So we did get to some hard words, but anyways, here we go.
Rosemary, you want to take over?
On that day, on that day.
On that day, God made a covenant with Avram. To your offspring, I assign this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites.
Beautiful. Very well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I will tell you that's the end of the chapter, because the next chapter is going to be the story of Sarai and Hagar and Avram, Sarai getting new names, and the story of Ishmael. But this is the covenant of the pieces. This chapter 15. And again, you can see it's 21 verses. It's not, it's a separate unit. There's no question this is a separate unit. It's very strange whether this is a vision or when the vision ends. It seems like the vision does end to me, which is that this seems to really happen, but it's also possible that it doesn't really happen. What does happen in this scene, and we will come back and we will revisit this next week because I don't have enough time to totally decompress it, but we did want to kind of end with this idea that, as John said, this is an oral covenant. This is an agreement. I wouldn't say whether or not it's an oral agreement, whether or not it's an oral agreement doesn't really matter. It's a covenant, and everyone knows this is a brit. This is a covenant. This is a covenant. And so when God and Avram go into this explanation, where Avram essentially, God answers Avram's objections to this, is that Avram is told, you are 100% going to have so many descendants that if you can count the stars, that's how many descendants you'll have. And I am going to commemorate this, not with a seal, not with a stamp, not with a signature on the dotted line, but with this sacrifice which God passes through. Now, normally when you see a covenant, and I just kind of want to end with this, and we'll promise we'll come back to this. When we would think that the covenant is being entered into, that Abraham might do something, well, which he did. He cut the animals. I mean, he didn't make the animals, he prepared them. But God is the one who walks through, or God goes through as a torch, as a light, as a symbol, goes through, passes through the pieces. It's God that does that. It's not Avram that's walking through the pieces, it's God. And it's almost as if God is enacting this role of signing the covenant, of completing the agreement by going through this by going through this sacrifice, which again, Avram has to keep the animals away from it. It's not, it doesn't seem like it's a dream, but okay, maybe it's a dream. I'm not going to get hung up on whether this really happens or if it's in a dream. But the reality is that this discussion, this agreement, this finalization of this agreement seems to need to happen because God's made a promise to Avram, but Avram wants to know that God is going to deliver. And so this is the way that Avram gets that. It's
Which is really very strange. And I know we're over. Maybe next week we really can discuss this, because if this was written not at the time, right? The editor, the writer, this stuff is so suspicious. You know what I'm saying? Specific. It's just, and of all the things he wants to sacrifice, God, of all the things, you couldn't have just chiseled it out on a stone or something. I agree, or I don't get it.
And this is the fact that it says God karat. That's the word karat. Karet. Karat is the word, is the past tense. Karat habrit, made the covenant with Avram. This is the brit. This is a covenant. We heard about a covenant at the rainbow, covenant with Noah and all of humanity. This is a covenant with Avram. This is the land that I will give you. This is the land I will give you, and I will give you many descendants to fill that land. But remember something, this is not a small piece of land either. It goes all the way to from Egypt, the river of Egypt, which is not the Nile, but it's Wadi al Arish in the Negev, all the way up to the Euphrates, which is why, of course, there are people in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and other parts of the Arab world who say, wait a second, isn't the biblical promise of this land all the way to the river Euphrates? And by the way, if you think that this is not important, that this silly line in Genesis chapter 15, 18 is never going to come back again, go and watch the conversation that Tucker Carlson just had with Mike Huckabee, because he actually said to Huckabee, isn't the land that God promised Avram, or the way he says in the Bible, Carlson asks him, isn't that the land that the Jewish people are entitled to? To which Huckabee is kind of put on the hot seat on it and essentially says, well, that's what God said. But I don't know any Israelis that want to necessarily make that happen. But was in the discussion. Folks, that was less than a month ago, or maybe it was a month ago. So don't think that this is not ancient history. This is not a line in the Bible. This isn't a toss away line that people go, well, and whatever. People are still discussing it today. It has political ramifications in Israel and in the Middle East, and to some extent, even closer to home, my friends, because that was a discussion between two Christians. Okay? Tucker Carlson and Mike Huckabee. That happened, and it just happened. This is not ancient history. So, with that, folks, we will bid you adieu. And again, as we go through the next few days, tomorrow night we do not have class Wednesday night, but we will be back Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we'll have our class where I promise we'll come back and look at the covenant of the pieces a little bit more. If you have questions, if you want to read about it, please go ahead. And then we will next week be reading the wonderful story of perhaps take my handmaid's tale, and don't forget also has ramifications because, of course, Margaret Atwood, the great Canadian writer, wrote an interesting series of books, which then became movies, which then became television shows about The Handmaid. That is next week's. That's on the agenda for next week. The original Handmaid's Tale. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
See you Friday, Rabbi.
Thank you. We'll see. Oh, Joe Buchanan, Friday. Don't miss it.
Okay,
I'm wearing
bye-bye.
my special country shirt.